if your goal is to fill a field, which all of us as missionaries, as pastors and church planners, our goal should be to fill the field, fill the earth, make disciples of all nations, right? And so think about it. You have this field, certain borders you have to fill. How do I best fill it? Do I plant one tree and then just fertilize it, and try to fill the field by growing one tree really, really big? Or do I plant dozens of trees in the field?
Welcome back to episode 3 of the For the Harvest podcast, where we discuss Bible-based strategies for accelerating evangelistic growth globally. I'm here again with John, Paul, and David Worcester, and today we're going to jump into a subject that is really for everybody, and everybody that has their sights on ministry, whether they've been just starting out, thinking about starting out, or they've been in it for a long time. I think you're going to hear some principles that you may have never heard before. And I know for me, we're actually really a relief in some ways and an encouragement, and gave me a lot of hope. So I'm excited for all of you to get to hear about this paradigm that I've gotten to hear John share a number of times, actually in different countries. And I see the same response each time from these different cultures. This paradigm explains something that most of us in ministry have experienced during the course of ministry, but really just haven't been able to put our finger on exactly what's going on. And sometimes we even feel guilty about it. And so I pray that some of that guilt will be kind of diminished today and actually replaced with hope and encouragement. And so today we're going to talk about the church growth life cycle. So John, you've been doing ministry for 50 years or so. When did you first start to pick up on this or understand this paradigm?
Well, very early in my Christian experience. You remember the other podcast I might have told you about how I came to Christ, and I started a group, and it grew really, really fast. That first summer, 3 months, went from me to about 30. So new growth grows fast. I experienced that. And I also visited some churches that have been around for years and years that same summer. And then after that, and most of them basically were not growing anymore. They were plateaued or declining. And so I've noticed that there's a big difference in the season of life that a church is in. And so we want to think about that. And the way I try to summarize it is that new thing. I base all this on just looking at nature, also history, but especially looking at nature. When God creates life, it starts small, real small, one cell pretty much gets fertilized. And then it grows fast for a period of time. But after that growth period, and that varies from different types of organisms. Rabbits grow to their mature size a lot faster than elephants do, but they grow fast for a while, and then they plateau. And it's not like a bell curve. It's a plateau where it stays at that similar size for a long, long time. It bumps up a little bit, goes down a little bit, but it doesn't, especially height in humans, it works with humans, you get a certain height, like, 5, 10, or 6 feet, and you don't grow to 7 feet. But you might grow other ways, but we're not going to get into that. But anyway, so it grows fast for a while, it plateaus, and eventually life declines. It dies. And the Church of Jesus Christ lasts forever, but the local churches have a life cycle, and we see that. And they tell me that the average church worldwide lasts about 80 years, which is kind of similar to an age span of a human. So anyway, I thought that's the big concept of this.
Okay, I'm curious. Paul, David, you guys probably were aware of this concept early on, but how have you seen that kind of show up in your ministries?
Yeah, I mean, especially a lot of people, on the front end of a ministry, starting a new ministry, you do see a lot of growth and a lot of people reached for Christ and a lot of excitement. Sometimes it starts very small, and that first initial push isn't as fast, but there's a certain point, almost like you can compare to the teenage years, where you start to get a little momentum and things really take off, and you think, oh, it's just going to be up and to the right forever. And so we had some seasons like that in Chico where I guess you could compare it to your teenage years. Like it's just blowing up. It's just like all sorts of things happening. But we did eventually kind of level out. And there's a lot of theories, I personal theories I have about those things. But some of it is just even the town or the community that you're trying to reach. Sometimes your church plays that certain role in it. And like you could almost in some churches even milk all that it's worth from out of a town or a city or a campus. And like I have a friend that started a campus ministry, and it only he was or the top leader you could imagine, and he grew that thing to about 70 students, but he did everything you could imagine to get it to that point. And then he went to a different city, different context, and planted a mega church, because it was more he could work with and do different things. So it's kind of those two. Sometimes your context plays a factor in it, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself on this conversation. But
what I've experienced personally is when I started ministry, there's a typical size that me as a leader, how kind of my DNA of if I'm planting something from scratch, this is about the size that I can grow it to. And I think that's another factor too. And like, kind of what he mentioned with different animals, they have different DNA, and in their DNA is kind of built like a rabbit's only going to be a certain size, or a tiger is only going to be a certain size. And so I believe that it's similar with leaders too, that there's certain leaders that they have that innate capacity to grow a ministry to a certain size. And then it's most likely it's going to plateau. And, God can do whatever he wants to do, whenever he wants to do it. Right. So he can always do something crazy. But in general, that's kind of the way life works, is like God gives. So I've seen that play out in my life. So.
Good. So I guess I'm going to ask a little bit of a leading question here, John, because, it's at first this sounds depressing, because you're telling me, and any ministry leader, hey, you're saying that like I've got a cap, that I can grow my ministry and then I'm stuck and I'm not going to have any more impact. That's not what you're saying, but that's how I could feel. So what, if you're looking at nature, or what's the solution to continue having a kingdom impact?
Well, think about what's maturity for. Maturity is for multiplication. So as a person gets to their DNA size, or rabbit or an elephant, when they get to their size, the way they obey God's command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth is by having babies. I mean, that's physically and that's spiritually. And so you've got, and that same principle applies to churches. And so part of the answer, and there may be, like these guys already said, there may be other reasons, leadership factors, or something stupid you're doing. You stop doing the stupid thing, you start growing again, that kind of stuff. But so there are all those factors that if you eliminate them, you might keep growing. But even if you're doing everything right, you're probably still coming to a DNA size, and that's sort of the issue that we're talking about here. Does that make sense? Yeah, is everybody tracking with me? Okay, good. That's okay. Good.
So let me kind of push back on one thing I hear a lot is, they use the statement of Jesus, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it.
Yep.
And they say, especially like if a local church dies, that's actually dishonoring to God. They'll even kind of use that as like, that's proving that verse. So what would you say to someone that's saying that?
Well, I think you differentiate between the church that Jesus was talking about. He's talking about the universal church, all people, all time. Jesus is building his church. He's going to continue building the church, come hell or high water. He's going to break through the barriers. He's going to grow the church. But that's different than a local church. The local church, the individual thing, is in a place and has a leader and has people. It will historically have shown it has a life cycle, and that fits with individual organisms that are around the world as well. I want to throw something else in too. Something else you said, Paul. There earlier on you said something about growth spurts as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true. There are growth spurts as a teenager, but that still doesn't compare to the birth of something new. The start of something new. The baby in the womb is many, many times faster than anything a teenager can ever think about when you look at it over the months. And so that the early stages, you have best. Now, you might not grow in the early stages because you might not be doing the right stuff. You might not be discovery evangelism. You might not be doing the right kind of meetings. There are all kinds of reasons why you don't grow. And the younger something is, another factor, the younger any kind of life is, the more fragile it is. So it's easy to kill a little baby sprout, harder to kill a big tree. It's easy to kill a tadpole. It's harder to catch and kill a frog. I mean, it's just the size makes a difference. And so doing the right things, the right size, being healthy young church, you have the best opportunity to grow really, really fast. I mean, look at Jesus' ministry. I'm getting ahead of myself too. I think we're going to come to that. But when you look at Jesus' ministry, the first 3 days, he went from 1 to 5. Calculate out the annual growth rate of going 1 to 5 in 3 days. That's a math person, that gets pretty astronomical. But he also, the early church grew really, really fast in those first years. We see thousands coming. Same thing with the church in Jerusalem when it was born. The early days, you see really fast growth. And as long as you keep multiplying the fast growth new starts, you can continue to keep it going. But if you just try to just grow the one church or the one ministry, you're limiting your ability to fill the earth, to fill the field that God's called you to fill.
Yes. One of the people have like a mentality of there's the statement, healthy things grow. That's the statement. And I think that what I've seen often is churches, they buy into that heart and soul, and they put all their effort into tweaking like tons of little things in their ministry, and then they don't put any effort into multiplication. So why do you think that statement is such a powerful motivator for like leaders of existing churches, that if they could just tweak the right thing, then all of a sudden it's gonna blow up, and it's gonna why do you think that's such
that's a great question. This is what I call the church growth myth. Okay, that healthy things just grow and grow continually. And but the fact is that healthy things, healthy life grows fast for a while, and then it doesn't. That's the truth of it. And so, but people don't want to think that way. I mean, in America especially, we can do anything. We can be anything we want to be, and nothing, no limits. And it just, I think sometimes you just have to look at reality. And one thing you've seen in studies, and most people have experienced this, are listening out there. If your group has already plateaued a size, maybe it's been going for 4 years, and it's at 50 or 60, and it's staying at 50 or 60, it's very hard to get that going to another growth level. But that same group could pull together a team, a planter and a team, to go out and plant something else and get up to the 30 or 60 just in the next 6 months. And I've seen that happen over and over again in my ministry. It's not only what I've done, but also guys I've sent out. They've been able to grow things that early stages much, much quicker. That makes sense?
You alluded to this idea of filling the field with healthy churches,
yes,
rather than filling a room. A lot of us have that mindset of success is how many people can I pack into this room. It's filling the field with gospel seed and churches and groups,
disciples, yeah,
disciples, not just filling a room with people hearing you talk. Another
analogy of that, if your goal is to fill a field, which all of us as missionaries or as pastors and church planners, our goal should be to fill the field, fill the earth, make disciples of all nations, right? And so think about it. You have this field, certain borders you have to fill. How do I best fill it? Do I plant one tree and then just fertilize it, and try to fill the field by growing one tree really, really big? Or do I plant dozens of trees in the field? I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's the dozens of trees are going to fill that field with produce a lot more fruit than no matter how big that one group comes. Now, again, when I say this, I'm not saying I'm just for small churches. I've been a part of big churches, and we've seen some of our churches grow pretty good size. And so I'm not limiting the size, but I'm pushing from multiplication.
Yeah.
And so if you have the capacity to grow a huge church, grow a huge church. But don't just stay a huge church, multiply other huge churches or even smaller churches. That's kind of how I'd want to look. I'd want people to be thinking about this.
What would you say to someone who says, well, this perspective is kind of a lack of faith, that, you're kind of limiting God and like what he could do in the church with like saying that, it's plateaued. So I guess we're not going to try to grow anymore. And, we're not going to believe that God could grow anymore.
Well, I'll tell you two things. Even if a church gets to its plateaued size, gets to the normal size, 150 or something, it's pretty common kind of size that a church will get to if it's really growing well, or 30 is a really common size around the world. It gets to that size. It has to grow by 20% a year just to stay the same size. The statistics are in America, average 1 out of 5 people move every year, let alone some people dying. So just to stay at your 30, you've got to add 20% more people. So you've got to continue to push on evangelism, but to have the fast enough growth rate to keep it growing way beyond the 20% to 40, 50, 100%. That's what we get. I'm going to throw something else out here now too. Just a little bit of statistics. A group that starts a church and goes from 5 people to 50. What's the annual growth rate of that? You figure that out. It's 1,000%. Annual growth rate. How fast it's growing. Now, not so much how many people, but how fast. 1 to 50 or 5 to 50. But then you go from 50 to 100. Add the same 50 people. What's the annual growth rate? 100%. Oh, you math majors who got that right away. It's 100%.
Not me.
And then, but you have a church of 10,000, and it grows by 1,000 in a year. Wow, amazing! Grew by 1,000 people, 1,000 baptisms, 500 baptisms, 1,000 growth, whatever it is. That's amazing, and it is amazing, and we want to celebrate that. But you know what the annual growth rate of that is? 10%. Let those statistics kind of sink in. How do we most quickly? We're talking about a lot in this podcast about accelerating evangelistic growth globally. Well, how do we accelerate it? Well, one of the ways we accelerate it is by but through reproduction. It's through multiplication. That's where the exponential speed of growth comes when new things are planted. Many new things. Now, you got to have the right leader. You got to do the right stuff. I mean, it doesn't grow automatically, but it has the best chance because it fits in with the way God designed things. Life.
Good. That's good. And kind of answered David's question too, is there is an aspect of, if you're a pastor or a ministry leader, you want to steward your own gifts and your own flock and your own ministry with as much diligence and success, and maximize that opportunity and squeeze as much kingdom impact out of it as possible. So there are ways to grow in your preaching, grow in your leadership, move things around to kind of help things grow. And so it's not a defeatist mindset, but also on the other hand, we are called to have faith for things that God has actually promised in his word. So if God has not promised us the mega church, we don't need to be like, he may not have promised you a mega church. And so that's like, we need to be very careful about using faith as like a genie in a bottle to get our own wishes and desires, and not live a biblical faith of like, our faith is to honor God. And actually, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ that gives me strength. That's not about dunking a basketball or achieving your dreams. That's about being content in every situation. And so I think even as a ministry leader, sometimes having faith is learning to rejoice in the current situation that you're in and maximize that, if that makes sense.
It's a really good point. And one thing Dad says a lot is that most ministry leaders are drunk on delusions of grandeur. That we're going to be the next big thing, whoever, insert your name of ministry idol that you want to be. We think that we're going to be that. And reality is God has given each of us a unique set of gifts and abilities that we need to steward well, do our best, like you said. But I think the challenge is, the tension that we feel is, people are so focused only on growing their ministry that they don't put any energy into multiplication. And I think that's the issue where, and then there's the verse that Jesus said, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. And I think it's the principle that there are some things we will have to die to in our church growth mindset in order to multiply, in order to prioritize multiplication. And I think that's what this church growth cycle is all about, is prioritizing multiplication through the entire process.
And I want to throw something else in here as we're thinking about this. I take existing ministry. We're talking about planting churches or planting new campus ministries, stuff like that. But there's an element of planting new things that can be, for a church, planting new groups, if they're started right. Planting new campuses. I've seen a lot of large churches that have plateaued at 2,000 or something like that, and they're just can't get above 2,000. So they start a new campus, and they'll grow that new campus to another 500, and so they get the growth. It's a form of multiplication. Now I'm biased towards church planting. I think there's some real advantages to that, but I think you can also multiply. An older church can multiply groups, as long as you're just not regathering the saints in new groups. You're really doing the kind of group that is targeting the lost, working with them. You know, is a new wineskin thing. I think we talked about last podcast. You might look back at that if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that in Chico. We kind of reached this point in our campus ministry, our college ministry, where we had a bunch of really solid leaders, and we were still seeing a lot of people come to Christ, but our size was kind of capped out. And so what we did is we started new groups, kind of like, but we even had their own brand, their own club on campus. We started a Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And because we kind of treated that almost like a partner ministry with our other ministry, and we saw that environment, we sent a small team to go start that, and we saw lots of fruit from athletes coming out to that. And then we started a Greek ministry to fraternities and sororities, and an international ministry. And so we kind of started these little sub ministries that were still part of our overall orbit, and we would partner together with the main college ministry. But that's a simple way to kind of expand. If you have too many leaders, like, remember we talked about the ratios in a previous episode, but that's a good problem to have too many solid leaders. But if you have that, a lot of times plateau churches have some people that are really bought into the vision, but you can divide and conquer and even start new groups that are evangelistic. Amen. Then you can kind of spread it out. So,
amen. Good word, Paul. Love it. Good word. Okay.
So, John, you mentioned this earlier and said you might have been getting ahead of yourself a little bit. So, scripturally, I know you've done a lot of study on this, particularly how this kind of stuff showed up in Jesus's ministry and Paul's. So could you just tell us a little bit about where you see this kind of idea show up in Scripture?
Well, in Scripture, it's really kind of interesting, because in Scripture, we only really have a young church movement. Most of the churches were young. We don't even have a lot of information. When we hear about 3 years of Jesus starting his ministry, going from 1 to 10,000 or more disciples that were in those fields, so he went to, and now I'm not talking about disciples like the 12. I'm talking about disciples like the everyday Christian disciple that's also a disciple. But anyway, that's another story. But Jesus grew his ministry really, really fast. And at the end of his ministry, he had Paul did the same thing. The early church did the same thing. But we only have really a lot of detailed information about those early stages of starting up. We don't have, what do you do with a church that's 80 years old? I mean, you just don't have those around yet. So it's hard to get, but you can get a lot of good information how to get them started and get them going. But you're going to have to figure out some ways to follow the Holy Spirit and use the principles to help your mature churches do the right thing. But I think one of the things about the mature church that we have to keep in mind, how it does the right thing is not just how it grows itself bigger, but how does it multiply? How does it raise up? A question that I'm brought up with often. Well, if our church has been plateaued for a while, or we're getting close to that, when should we plant a new church? And usually they're thinking about size. They're thinking, well, I should plant a new church when I get, 50% larger. You know, about 150, I got to get to 200 before we could plant a church. Or if it's a 500, then it's usually we got to get to 1,000 before we plant a church. You know, it's always somewhere out there. So it's nuts. But I'm going to tell you, I believe it has nothing to do with size.
Yep.
Other ones say, I'm not going to plant a church or a new ministry unless I have a lot of money, excess money in the bank and my budget. Or I can't plant it. I can't plant it right. So therefore, I'm not going to do it. And I don't think that's right either. That's not the factor. And, you know, frankly, it's not even health of the church, which is, some people will say that. They'll agree with me on these first two, but they'll say, well, the church's got to be healthy before it reproduces itself. And I can see some logic to that, but it's really not the church that's planting the church. It's the church planter that's planting the church. When you get down to it, Paul planted Philippi, not Antioch. Antioch sent Paul, but Paul was the church planter. He's the one the Holy Spirit used and got on site and actually grew that church. And so planted it and grew it. So we see, let's see, yeah, that's important to keep in mind. And I lost my thought. I went back.
Like what you're saying is the main factor, the main factor
Yes.
is the leader. The leader is really the only requirement for planting a church. Get the right leader, because the right leader will get the right team. The right leader will raise the money that they need, and they will be so, like, you know, the John Maxwell quote, everything rises and falls on leadership. So you get the right guy, and then, you know, the other factors don't matter nearly as much.
That's right. That's where I was going with this. And so you can, and the illustration I like to tell guys is this, that you can take a small church, 10 people, dirt poor, not even that healthy, got a little bit of unhealth in the church, but you could have the next greatest church planter in the world. You get the next Apostle Paul in that church, and that church, if they're willing to release him and send him out, he might start a whole movement. So it all has to do with leader readiness.
Yep.
Everything rises and falls on leadership, like David said, and John Maxwell says, but especially church planting. Church planting and starting ministries is very leader intensive. So we work, so the mature church, if it starts to plateau, start working on, how do I develop the next leader to send out? How do I put them through and get them so I can begin to start sending out? And hopefully you're sending out regularly. Our goal is to reach people in the harvest for the harvest. And very, very few churches actually do that. Most people that plant churches, even, they get somebody from the seminary, they get somebody from another church, they hire them. I hire them to come in and plant their church for them, which is fine. I'm glad for that. Guys need to find a place to plant churches. But what we really need to be working on is how do we raise up harvesters and planters from the harvest for the harvest.
Mm-hmm. And a piece of that puzzle is dripping in the vision for multiplication, even at the start of a church. And so
Amen.
You're constantly sharing about the need, not just of our church and our community, but look at all these other places that need the gospel. And as a leader, you are casting that vision, and you're creating a culture where that's celebrated. And if you don't have your own planter, adopt another planter that's nearby and show that your congregation cares about planting, and say, hey, we're helping, we're coming along to this guy that maybe even is 5-10 minutes down the road or whatever it is. That can send a powerful message to your local congregation. It's like, okay, we're kingdom focused. We're not just about building our own kingdom. We're God's kingdom. It's God's kingdom. And I even recommend, especially collegiate leaders, create a top 10 list of 10 campuses that you want, or if you're a church planner, 10 communities that you want to see new churches started in your area, and just like pass it around in your ministry. So we've had that, and it's funny, the list that I made and started passing around, we've had 2 teams that are committed to planting ministries on that top 10. They happen to be called to that. So we're slowly working our way down that top 10 list of campuses that we want to see new ministries. So you see Santa Cruz, and now we're sending a team to Reno soon. And so it's just kind of fun to kind of think through, there's something, without vision, the people perish. And so we need to constantly be casting that vision towards multiplication. That's kind
I
of
thought you were going, I like that a lot, Paul. I thought you were going to go with a different kind of top 10 list, though. I thought you were going to say in your local ministry, what's your top 10 list of the most likely planters in my ministry
oh
that I can start to invest in and work with and develop towards it, and where are they at in their process, and how do I make a leadership funnel out of
yeah.
out of my church. So I thought you were going there, which I think that's probably true too.
Yeah,
Well,
probably do both. Really, yeah, yeah.
I think one of the tensions that you feel is that in order to grow just a little bit more is a different set of processes that to develop those 10 leaders or whatever. And so I think what you see a lot in churches is they're so focused on growing a little bit bigger that they don't put the necessary energy into developing leaders in the way that they should. And so one of the things that, we're passionate about, all of us in this podcast are passionate about, is making sure that we prioritize that time with the top leaders that can multiply. And I think that's the key. That's what we see Jesus doing. He had the large movement going, but he had his 12 guys that he was investing day and night in. And so I think that's really the key to multiplication, is what kind of leaders are you developing?
That's right. And think about this. One thing we like to talk about in our ministries is funnels, right? Is we reach a lot of people. The top of the funnel, picture that in your mind, a funnel. The top of the funnel being evangelism. We need to put, when you start something, you put all kinds of energy into evangelism. It's all about the first few years of a church. It's all about evangelism. You're trying to reach people. But Jesus was all about evangelism throughout his whole 3 years. But then he also had a bottom of the funnel. And the bottom of the funnel was the 12. And to a certain extent, the 70, that he poured his life into them at the bottom of the funnel so that they would someday go out and reproduce. I like to think about it this way in a funnel. If you divide a funnel into 3 categories, the top one is evangelism. So, and Jesus taught many and evangelized many. In the middle is that he touched some, healed the leper, cast out the demon here. He touched individuals in the situation, but he didn't spend a whole lot of time with them. He kind of did it fast, but he spent a lot of time in the bottom of the funnel. So he focused on the top and bottom of the funnel. And then he had systems, which we want to talk about in one of our future podcasts. He had systems. So how do you take care of the people in the middle of the funnel? The people become disciples, they don't become leaders. I mean, that's a really important thing. And there's a lot of churches that they focus all their energies on the middle of the funnel. They're so focused on the middle of the funnel, they never get around to doing the top of the funnel or the bottom of the funnel. You get sucked into the mushy middle, and you just don't really you don't maximize evangelism, you don't maximize leadership training. So that's just something else. But you do have to take care of those people. They're sheep. They need to be loved. They need to be helped. They need to be processed. Some of them become leaders. Some of them won't. But you need to love and care for and feed all the sheep. But you train some. So teach many, touch some, train a few.
And a great use of those leaders at the bottom of the funnel that you're training is to give them experience shepherding and leading the people in the middle. So so that's a good way to kind of point them back up to, hey, these are some people you can lead, maybe lead a group, maybe disciple some people that and help you with evangelism too. So you're putting these leadership training is not classroom, of course. It's boots on the ground, come with me, do discipleship. The way Jesus did discipleship, he appointed 12 to be with him so that he could send them out to preach. It wasn't like, let's go to the desert, study the book of Isaiah, talk about our struggles. That wasn't the way he did discipleship. He took them with him to every town and village, saturating their target areas with the gospel. And so he was showing them how to do ministry. It wasn't just like this kind of small discipleship group type thing. So I think that's in our leadership. Even when we think about leadership development, it's giving them reps and then coaching and helping them get experience that way.
Yeah, I've heard someone say, don't get so focused on petting sheep that you don't have time to raise up new shepherds. You raise up shepherds, they can help you pet the sheep, they can help you take care of the sheep. But yeah, that's
good. I know our time's probably getting close to getting done with this podcast. I want to bring up one other thing, though, is how do we make this practical? How do we really bring it in?
Yeah.
And what I call this the wisdom of the when. When you do certain activities or certain procedures, it makes a difference when you do them.
Mhm.
Certain things you do in the early stage that you have to prioritize to really make the most of it. There's some things you do in a later stage, in all the stages, but there's certain things. You guys know, you could probably memorize the verse in Ecclesiastes where it talks about wisdom, a kind of a definition of wisdom. The person who's wise is what? He knows the proper time in procedure to do the activity. And so you've got to, if you're starting a church plant, you don't focus on stuff that mature churches ought to be focused on. You focus on stuff you need to be focused on, which is evangelism, basically, and training a few leaders in your team and keeping your team healthy. But you're really focused on evangelism in the early stage. But if you get too focused on reproduction, filling the, planting churches, stuff like that in the early stage, you're kind of missing your opportunity. You're getting your energies in the wrong place. But at the same time, if you're at a later stage, a mature stage of church, if you put all your energy just on trying to evangelize and get your group growing bigger, and don't put any time into, and the right kind of priority time into developing leaders, then you don't maximize what you can do at that stage. Because at a later stage, you got more people, you got more resources, you really can do some great leadership training and give them opportunities to start new things and there's stuff like that. So the wisdom of the when makes a big, I see a lot of planters make this mistake. They go in emphasizing, instead of emphasizing evangelism, they emphasize discipleship or leadership training. And I'm just going to disciple the people. I'm going in, I'm not going to evangelize. I'm just going to disciple the Christians that I can gather up to get them to evangelize. I say baloney to that. That's not the way to plant an evangelistic growth church. You go in and you go after people. You go after lost people, win them to Christ, and then you disciple the ones you win. And train a few leaders along the way. If somebody wants to join you to kind of help catch fish with you, that's fine. But we're not starting the church to be the best, discipling church around. We're starting a church to reach people, and then we're going to disciple those people and develop leaders in the process.
Yeah, evangelism really separates. When you're starting a new ministry, especially if a Christian wants to join your ministry, the best response is, okay, yeah, we're looking for people to join us in reaching this community for Christ. And I'm starting this evangelistic Bible study, or I'm going here to do this evangelism. Are you coming? When are you going to join me to do that? And so if they want to join, they have to join the cause, not just to get like the care from you. Yeah. So that's a good way to kind of like keep that DNA in the early stages of your ministry, white hot towards evangelism. That's like, if a Christian wants to join, that's a good thing, maybe not. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. It might mess up your ratios. Remember, we talked about ratios last week. You get too many Christians, then the new believer has a hard time fitting into the group. So we shoot ourselves in the foot for evangelistic growth so too often.
Well, I think the way that I've heard you explain it is the different stages. So like the early stage is the fast growth stage,
right?
Then the plateaued stage is basically you being like frequent kind of multiplication and sending out leaders. And then the declining stage is for faithfulness, being faithful, to multiply out churches. And so I think even just that picture of the kind of the plateaued, you rise really fast at first, and then it kind of flattens out for a while. But then when it's flat, you're sending out new pods and new ministries constantly. Then when it's declining, that's the time to spoil your grandkids and go back and like invest in the stuff that's growing quickly and fastly. And so I think it's helpful to see like the entire picture. I don't know if there's anything else that you would add to.
I will add something to that. And something you'll probably like, David, being the preacher type that you are, is you're like, I got 4 F's for you. Okay. The first one is grow fast. Fast growth, early stage. That's the early stage. Then secondly, get fit. You want to get strong. You want to disciple the people. The second stage is getting fit. The third stage is multiply frequently. That's your reproduction stage. And then the last one is give faithfully. And so what do you give as a declining church? You give your resources, your wisdom, maybe your building over to a young church. You're in the giving mode when you're in your decline mode. You should be, I think. If we really are serious about filling the earth, we the churches that are declining, that admit, okay, the reality, we're declining. How can we use our resources that we have, and how can I make a lasting impact and leave a legacy? I just think that's huge. And we see a lot of churches around America in our denomination and stuff like that are dying like that, but they're giving a lot of their churches over to young church planters that have a growing thing. But some of the churches that I've started, that's happened. They've got buildings, not because they built their own building, because somebody gave them a building, because this church was growing and that one wasn't anymore. And that's great for the kingdom. That's kingdom growth.
Yes. And I in my role with North American Mission Board, I get to go into some of these older churches and established churches and things. And it's a joy to see how excited they are about hearing the stories of what God's doing on campus or their missionaries overseas. And, it's really significant. It's really significant to bless and to have a vision for. And so we never want to minimize something that's significant for God's kingdom. And so I think God is very honored by dying churches that are being faithful to give and to use their last breaths for his kingdom. And so I think that's something we need to keep in mind, is that it's not like, oh, this tragic story. No, it honors God to give and to die, even to die for the glory of God in some ways. So I don't know. I get emotional.
That's right.
But
So thinking really practically, I wonder, Dad, if you could share just what at each stage, what's like the one thing they need to focus on? Maybe it's using that word again, but just really practically, like, what would you say is the focus for each stage for a leader who's listening? If they diagnose themselves that, hey, I'm in that plateaued stage, what do I do?
Right. All right. Well, I think it's growth, but not just growth, any kind of growth. First stage, growth, but I say evangelistic growth. Accelerate evangelistic growth and make the most of that first stage. Second stage, you're continuing with that. I mean, you never stop trying to grow evangelistic, but it's slowing down. Now you put more and more time in discipleship and to pouring into grounding the people who come to faith. And then that's you're still growing. That's kind of teenage years. And then when you get to the mature years, now you are, the young man, what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to get fit. They're supposed to get strong. That's their glory. So young men get strong, spiritually, physically, and spiritually. And then for the mature stage, it's multiplication. You're raising up leaders to send out, to start new groups, campuses, ministries, something. You're starting something new. And then the last stage, it's in faithful contribution of what God has blessed you with, whether it's wisdom or whether it's you're living your life for the next generation. That's what the older stage does, is that they pour their life out and they, like David said, they spoil their grandchildren.
that's good.
And help their children who are still multiplying to multiply more. So not just the grandchildren, but it's helping the children to multiply more.
A helpful example of this, I have some friends that lead this group called the Salt Company in Iowa, and they reached a certain point. They were actually reaching hundreds of students, and they grew a large church as a result of the students they were reaching. They grew basically a mega church. And I remember talking to them, and they said they had this cool statement. They said, at a certain point, we could have put our energies into growing a marginally larger mega church, all of our energies, but we decided there was all these campuses and we had all these young leaders coming up that we shifted our efforts into picking out these new campus communities to start churches in. And so now they're on 30 something campuses across the nation, and they just had that shift, and that was just recently, probably, I don't know how many years ago, but they've been able since then to multiply to about 30 major campuses across the United States. And so they're a good example of kind of even a successful ministry reaching a plateau, so to speak.
Yep.
But using that for serious intentional multiplication. And they have this conference every year where they call it the SALT Conference. And they have thousands of students at this conference from all the different ministries. And every year they're celebrating where they're going next. So they say, okay, we're going to University of Florida. And they have and they even get students to go with them. And they kind of have these teams. And it's kind of this cool momentum builder that they have there. So they're just a good example of kind of what we're talking with frequent multiplication.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the phrase that Dad uses is that plateaus are for planting. So if you're in the plateau is for planting, just sending out people. So
That's a good point. It's kind of funny that is gardening. It's a lot easier to, pull a tiller along a flat ground than it is a hill. So that's funny. Well, thank you guys. This has been a great kind of deep dive into the church growth life cycle. Again, I hope it was as encouraging to those listening as it was to me when I heard about it for the first time. And I think for me, it just provided this new focus on, okay, I now know where I am and I need to get after some multiplication because I've already hit this plateau. So it's time to go do some multiplication. So that was encouraging to me. So, well, thanks for joining us on this third episode of the For the Harvest podcast, where we've discussed another major strategy in how to accelerate evangelistic growth globally. Join us next time.